اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to ICZ's English program for tonight. My name is Raza Ali and inshallah I will be your MC for tonight's program. I would like to start the program by inviting Brother Maysam Raza to recite from the Holy Quran. Please recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم الذي هجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك صوت عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
Thank you, Brother Maysam, for that beautiful recitation of the Quran. I would like to invite Brother Maysam once again to continue with a salam.
بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. اے چاند کربلا کے تو نے تو دیکھے ہوں گے اترے تھے اس زمیں پر عرش بری کے تارے اے چاند کربلا کے تو نے تو دیکھے ہوں گے اترے تھے اس زمیں پر عرش بری کے تارے اے چاند کربلا کے اے چاند جلوہ گر ہے ہاشم کا چاند یہاں پر خیرات روشنی کی لے لیجیو یہاں سے اے چاند اے چاند اس زمین پر رکھیو ہمیشہ ٹھنڈک سوتے جو ہیں یہاں پر زہرا کے ہیں یہ پیارے حر اور حبیب جیسے جاں باز اور احبا مارے گئے یہیں پر انصار شاہدی کے مارے گئے یہیں پر بے دردیوں ستم سے مسلم کے دونوں پیارے زینب کے دونوں بیٹے اے چاند پامال ہو رہی تھی قاسم کی لاش رن میں عباس اور سرور چنتے تھے ان کے ٹکڑے بازو کٹے یہیں پر عباس با وفا کے اذن وغا نہ پایا پانی بھلا نہ پائے اس سرزمیں پہ گزرا سرور پہ یہ بھی صدمہ سینے پہ کھائی برچھی ہم شکل مصطفیٰ نے پانی پلانے لائے ایک مہلکہ کو سرور کی عذب حرملا نے تیرے ستم لگا کے اے چاند اس بن میں ایک بچی بابا کو ڈھونڈتی تھی بکھرے ہوئے پڑے تھے جب سر بریدہ لاشیں پھر یہ بھی تو نے دیکھا وہ غم رسیدہ بچی سینے پہ سو رہی تھی بے سر پدر سے لپٹے بازو بندھے یہیں پر پہلے پہل حرم کے इस सरज़मीं से निकले सज्जाद सर झुकाए ऐ चांद करबला के तूने तो देखे होंगे उतरे थे इस जमी पर अर्शे बरी के तारे है चांद करबला के बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद व अज्जिल फरजहुम.
Thank you very much, Brother Maysam. I'd now like to invite our respected guest scholar, Sheikh Jafar Muhabballah, to address us. Please recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ما تعبدون من دونه إلا أسماء سميتموها أنتم وآباؤكم ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان إن الحكم إلا لله أمر ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه ذلك الدين القيم ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I give my condolences to each of you on the occasion which we are commemorating. And that is the shahadat, the aftermath of the shahadat of Imam Hussein, his companions, and his Ahlul Bayt in Karbala. And thereafter the imprisonment of Imam Zain al-Abidin, the women and children of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wassalam. And thereafter the return of the Ahlul Bayt to Karbala on the 40th day after the shahadat of Imam Hussein, or in fact, as we mentioned, according to some of the historical accounts and research, a year and 40 days. But nonetheless, it is the Arbaeen, as we call it. Our discussion has been on the 15th right that Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi wasallam outlines in the Treaties of Rights, the Rasalat al-Hukuk, which is the right of the Sultan. That right, which we mentioned, begins with understanding and knowing that there is a power dynamic within society. As Imam Zain al-Abidin, he says, وَأَمَّا حَقُّ السُّلْطَانِ أَن تَعْلَمْ أَنَّكَ جُعِلْتَ لَهُ فِتْنَةً وَأَنَّهُ مُبْتَلًا فِيكَ بِمَا جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ لَهُ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ سُلْطَانٍ. It is to understand that there's a power structure, there's a power dynamic, and within that power dynamic, the sultan or that person who is in a position of authority is being tested. One part of his test is based on external factors, which the subjects or the citizens, anyone who is under the authority of that sultan, makes up that test or that trial, that fitna. And then that sultan, that authority, that figure of authority, also is tried within himself or herself with regards to their, you could say, spiritual constitution, their constitution of faith and iman. In fact, every person is faced with these two types of tests. And we can just refer back to the hadith of Rasulullah, where he stated that كُلُّكُمْ رَاءٌ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Each of you are shepherds, and each of you are responsible for his or her flock. So these two tests exist for everyone. But our concern in these lecture series is with that test as it faces the sultan or that person who is in authority, and how you would engage with that person in authority. After Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi wasalam, he mentions these two tests that each and every person undergoes, or actually the sultan undergoes. Then Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he states that every person, he says, وَأَنَّ عَلَيْكَ أَنْ لَا تَتَعَرَّضَ لِسَخَطِهِ. He says that you should not put yourself or expose yourself to the displeasure of the sultan. And this is what we'll find in most versions of the Risalat al-Hukuk, or the Treaties of Rights. However, I want to refer to another version that Sheikh Hassan al-Qabanchi, that he brings forth in his commentary on the Treaties of Rights as well. Because what he writes is something very interesting. He does also allude to this part that Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he says, do not expose yourself to the displeasure of the sultan, whereby it will lead to your destruction, or in fact that you will be part and parcel to your own destruction if you expose yourself to the displeasure of the sultan. But in the version that Hassan al-Qabanchi that he outlines, there's a section that is before that, and it's very beautiful. And we see that this is something that all of the Imam alayhim engaged in. So perhaps in his version, or where he had found the narration to include this, is very useful with thinking about the rights of the sultan, in fact, and how to engage with a person who is in a position of power. So in that version, Hassan Qabanchi, he brings this part of the narration. He says, وَأَن تُخَلِّسَ لَهُ فِي النَّسِيحَةِ وَأَن لَا تُمَاحِكَهُ فَقَدْ بَسَطْتَ يَدَكَ عَلَيْكَ فَتَكُونْ سَبَبَ هَلَاكِ نَفْسِكَ وَهِلَاكِهِ. So he also brings that part of not exposing yourself to the displeasure, but before he brings this, he says that one of those rights of the sultan is that you, as a person under the authority of that sultan, or a person who is in a position of power, who has walaya, and tukhallis lahu fi nasiha, to give sincere advice to the person who's in a position of authority. So what is this advice? What type of advice would you give to a person in a position of authority? When we look at the seerah of all of the prophets, and we look at the seerah of the Imams alayhim wasalam, though they may not have been in a position of political power, they were those individuals, they were those folks who were giving a nasiha, and true and sincere advice, as this particular version of the Risalat al-Hukuk mentions. When we look at the Prophet Noah, very beautifully and eloquently in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he puts forth the dialogue of the Prophet Noah in Surah Al-A'raf, where Noah, he says, أُبَلِّغُكُمْ بِرِسَالَاتِ رَبِّي وَأَنْصَحَ لَكُمْ. So Noah, he outlines his mission and his call to his people, whereby he says, I am delivering to you the message from my Lord, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَنْصَحَ لَكُمْ. And I am giving you advice. In other words, his advice for his people is directed towards, or is guided by, that message, that revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise in Surah Al-Hud, the same scenario where Noah, he's talking about this nasiha, this advice that he's given to his people, and of course is including the sultan, or those folks who are in authority, because from the account that we have, Noah, he was not leading that nation, but he was one of the prophets, one of the individuals who was living under the authority that existed at that time. And Noah, he was calling everyone towards Tawheed, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Wahid al-Qahhar, that single authority of all, that there's no one who is capable or has that type of authority but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in Surah Al-Hud, verse 34, Noah, he says, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still living, he says, وَلَا يَنْفَعُكُمْ نُصْحِي إِنْ أَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَنْصَحَ لَكُمْ إِنْ كَانَ اللَّهُ يُرِيدُ أَنْ يُغْوِيكُمْ. So he says, he tells his people, because not everyone accepted the advice of Noah. Not everyone accepted what Noah was bringing to them. Of course, and we know the story that only a few folks got onto the ship of Noah, and they were saved, others were drowned. So Noah, he says that my advice to you is not beneficial to you. Although I advised you and I wanted to advise you, but that advice was not beneficial to you, especially if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as he says, إِنْ كَانَ اللَّهُ يُرِيدُ أَنْ يُغْوِيكُمْ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to misguide you or set you astray. And of course, this particular statement, as our ulama, they have explained, it is not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who causes his creation to go astray. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does everything in his power to send forth examples, and the prophets and the imams and the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the righteous servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide mankind, to guide his creation. But when they themselves, they do not listen, when they themselves cut themselves off, as we read yesterday in the sermon of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam, sermon 93, where he says the fitna of Bani Umayyah is a fitna which is amya, samma. It is a fitna which is blinding and deafening. So if a person is caught in that wave of fitna, it will blind them from the truth. It will cause them to be deaf with regards to the truth. And it's not that the truth and the da'wah towards haqq, the call towards truth, is not there. No, they themselves cut themselves off. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, and we mentioned this, that shaitan does not have sultan, or he does not have authority over any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation who are servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As long as they are within the ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then shaitan will not have any power or authority over them. Only when they disconnect themselves from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and at that point, then shaitan has power and authority over them. And this is by their own hand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not force them to go towards misguidance, nor does he force them to embrace guidance. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides that guidance for mankind, for his creation, and with free will, they are to choose what is right. Likewise, we see in the call of the Prophet Salih, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he explains that Salih, and in Surah Al-A'raf, he calls his people, he says, وَقَالَ يَا قَوْمِ لَقَدْ أُبَلِّغُكُمْ رَسَالَةَ رَبِّي وَنَصَحْتُ لَكُمْ ولكن لا تحبون الناصحين. So Salih as well, one of the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, calls his people. He says that I have come, I have delivered the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I have given you the best advice for yourselves, for your soul, for your dunya as well, your dunya and akhirah, for governance, for living together in peace and harmony and with justice in society. However, this advice was not beneficial to you. Why was it not beneficial? Because those folks, لا يحبون الصالحين, that they did not like, or لا يحبون ناصحين, they did not like the people who were giving advice. I mean, we look at the meaning, at least within our commentaries to Mufassirin, what they say about this nasiha, that what is this nusah that the Prophet Nuh he gave, and likewise the Prophet Salih, also the Prophet Isa, Prophet Musa, all of our prophets, and as well as all of our imma alayhim afsalatu wasalam. They say that the reality of this nusah, that when we give advice, if this is also one of the rights of the Sultan, that the people who are under the authority of that leader, that governor, that person in authority, if we are to give that advice, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the idea and the concept that you've been created as a fitna. جُعِلْتَ أَنَّكَ جُعِلْتَ فِتْنَةً لَهُ. So if you're that fitna, as we mentioned, that the meaning of fitna is not to create chaos, it's not to create disturbance, but that fitna is, when we look at it in Islamic sense, to bring about refinement. Yes, one aspect of fitna, as we see Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he mentioned in Sermon 93, that the fitna of the Ahlul Jamal, people in the battle of the camel, Ahlul Safin, people in the battle of Safin, people of Ahlul Nahrawan, those who fought him in Nahrawan, that type of fitna, yes, it is chaotic, it is unjust, it is unfounded, it is unprincipled. But a true, or you could say a dignified type of fitna, as we mentioned, you say the literal meaning of fitna, it means to refine something. And so if the citizens or the people under an authority is a fitna, and yes, they could be either the chaotic, unprincipled fitna that creates, or that is blinding and deafening to people, meaning that you blind people from truth, you cause people not to hear and understand truth, then that fitna is ungodly. But if the so-called fitna, or the refinement, and we'll use that term to distinguish, if the refinement is to call people towards the truth, towards haqq, to give them this nasiha, then that nasiha, as our Mufassirin, they stated that the reality of nasiha, it is tahaqquq as-sidq, is in order to establish truth. وَالْخُلُوص مِنَ الْغَشِّ, and that's, you could say, advice, that refinement that you're bringing to the society, that refinement that you're bringing to those in authority, it should be calling them towards truth, as the Prophet Nuh and the Prophet Salih, as they both did, as we see that their nusha, that their nasiha was based on risalati Rabbi, was based on the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sincere and has no deception in it. It has within it truth. So therefore, if you're to give that advice should be based on the principles, or divine principles, and they should be truthful, and it should be sincere, without any type of deception, fil qawl wal amal, not in one's statement, in one's speech, or in their actions. And this is the nasiha. This is as the version of the Risalat al-Hukuk that Sheikh Hassan Kabanchi, that he outlined, that the right of the Sultan is that those folks who are under his authority should be giving them sincere advice. And this is exactly what Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi wasallam, he stated. He says that if at any moment, if you see that my actions are in contrary to the Quran and to the Sirat of Rasulullah, the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, then he said, then come forth. Say something. He says, because I am the one who is advising you towards the Quran, towards the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I am the first one to practice that. Likewise, we see in the advice of Imam Baqir alayhi wasallam, he was also someone who would advise his companions to reject the misguidance that the leaders they would do, the khulafa would do, the hukam. He would say, reject that guidance. Don't follow in that guidance. And be those who present a nasiha, to give good advice. In fact, in one of the riwayats that is associated with Imam Baqir alayhi wasallam, he says, Man masha ila sultanin ja'irin fa'amarahu bitaqwa Allah wa wa'adahu wa khawwafahu kana lahu mithlu أجر الثقلين من الجن والإنس ومثل أجورهم. So Imam Baqir, he said, or at least what is ascribed to him, as he said, that whoever goes to a tyrant or tyrannical ruler, إلى سلطان جائر, and he commands that Sultan al-Ja'ir بتقوى الله, to be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be conscious of those people who are under his authority, to be conscious of them. Because one cannot be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and unconscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Meaning one cannot claim that, oh, well, I am conscious of Allah, I have taqwa Allah, but yet oppress the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that person, according to Imam Baqir, who goes to them and advises that Sultan for taqwa Allah, and gives him sincere advice and instills within him fear, but not fear of the people, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Khawwafahu, because that sole authority that is above everyone is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah wahid al-qahar. And this is what Yusuf was teaching Sahib al-Sijn, the companions of his prison cell. He was teaching them, he says, do you want to have all of these different authorities, arbab? Or is it better to have one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-wahid al-qahar. So Imam Baqir, this is what he's advising, not to still instill fear in the Sultan with, oh, well, we're going to create chaos, or we're going to disrupt this. No, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَكَانَ لَهُ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ الثَّقَلَيْنِ. So whoever does this, as Imam Baqir, he states that they will have the reward of the two weighty things among men and jinn. And this is exactly what the prophets, they themselves did when the prophet Musa, he was told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to go to Fir'aun. It was not to dethrone the Fir'aun, but it was to call him towards taqwa Allah, call him towards refining himself. Because if the Pharaoh at that time refined himself and worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then of course he would not oppress the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said in Surah Naziyat, he tells Fir'aun, tells Musa, he says, اذهب إلى الفرعون إنه طغى. That, oh Musa, go to Fir'aun, because he has become tyrannical. اذهب إلى الفرعون فإنه طغى. قل هل لك إلى أن تزكى. And tell Fir'aun, he tells Fir'aun to, well, move down out of your throne, then I'm going to come. No, he says, هل لك إلى أن تزكى. That will you purify yourself? In other words, will you become a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? وَأَهْدِيَكَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَتَخْشَىٰ. Says if you're ready and you're willing to purify yourself, to submit yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the heavens and yours, the one who is in al-hukm illa lillah, the one who wills true authority, true power. And you follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws, his plans for creation, a plan which is just, a plan which is fair. So then, again, the justice will be established. Musa did not go to Fir'aun and says, hey, move away. That I'm going to take your seat of authority. Yes, when Fir'aun, he refused and the oppression continued, then Musa, he took action. He took Bani Israel out of Egypt, out of Misr, to save them, which led to, again, the downfall of the Fir'aun, led to the drowning of Fir'aun and his army, because they closed themselves off from justice. They were those folks that whatever advice the Prophet was giving them, they didn't want to listen. They didn't want to listen. When we look at this concept of advice as well, what we learn, and this is a very beautiful point, because as we mentioned that all of the prophets, they came and they gave advice to their nations, which included the sultan, included those who were in power, that they didn't just simply come and give advice to the sultan or just simply to the people. In the case of Saleh that we mentioned, Saleh, at one point he left, as it says that he left from among his people. And this was after the miracle of the camel had been established. They wanted a miracle from Saleh. And so the she-camel was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this cave. And of course the she-camel was supposed to drink on a certain day and eat on a certain day, which for that day, most of the water would be drank by the she-camel, because according to the accounts, the she-camel was quite large, quite big. And so the people on that day, they would have to bear that. Either you fast on that day or you ration so that the she-camel can drink and eat, and the she-camel was not to be harmed. So for some time, Saleh, he left from his people and he came back. And when he came back, he saw that there was this unrest. That same unrest where Saleh, he's speaking about, he says that this advice that you've been given, that the advice is not beneficial to you. Why? Because you've become a people, la tuhibbuna nasihin. You do not like those folks who are giving you advice. So, according to some of the accounts, Saleh, he had to, again, to call his people back to the path of truth. And according to the riwayat, it says the people had divided into three groups. One group which vehemently opposed Saleh, that they were in opposition to him. And perhaps from the beginning they were in opposition to Saleh. The second group was among those folks who had some doubt. They weren't necessarily against Nabi Saleh alayhi salam, but they had doubts. And then the third group were the believers, the mu'mineen, that they believed in Saleh and what he had guided them towards. They accepted his advice, they accepted his guidance, and even though he had left for some time and came back, they never doubted in the Prophet Saleh. So the Prophet Saleh, he began to, again, reestablish that advice and begin to deliver, again, that message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his people. And according to the riwayat, it says that the first group that Nabi Saleh, he started with, was those who were in doubt. Those individuals who were had shak. So he spoke with him, he talked with them, he reassured them, and again, gave them the signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, until they came back into the folds of Iman. The second group that Saleh, he went to at that point, were those who opposed him. Perhaps among the leaders who had authority, like, and they would be the ones who would feel that, oh, well, they have something to lose. If we have to be just, we have to be upright, we have to abide by the laws that Nabi Saleh has set forth, then they were the ones who opposed the Prophet, and he went to them second. The last group that he went to were the believers, because they already had Iman. And his going to them, his preaching among them, was only to solidify their Iman, to make their Iman much stronger than what it was. And this is a method of, we could say, tabligh. Quite often in our tabligh, we go to the people first who, they already know the message. They already understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they accept, and they don't have doubts. But Saleh, he went to those who had doubts first. And what we understand from this, and how this division came about, or how it took shape in the nation of Saleh, and even with regards to Noah and all of the prophets, that some will doubt and you call them. You clear up their doubt. Some will oppose and you must still call them. You don't leave them and say, well, we're not going to give them the message. No, you call everyone. You call everyone. But their acceptance may not be the same. Some people will reject, as we said, as we showed, that Nabi Nuh, he said that la yanfa'ukum nushi, that my advice to you is not beneficial. But that still did not make him be complacent and not invite them, not call them towards the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, the Nabi Saleh, he said, La tuhibbuna nasihin, that, you don't like the people who are giving advice. So that still did not stop him from giving the advice, from calling the people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran itself that people, he says, Inna al-insana li rabbihi lakanud. That many people, they will be ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created them, has created everything in His universe. They are benefiting from the blessings and the ni'mat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when the righteous servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Anbiya, the A'imma alayhim afrasatu wasalam, the righteous servants, they go forth and they call people back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of them are ungrateful. They don't think about where this ni'mah came from. وَإِنَّهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ لَشَهِيدٌ. They know that. وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, they simply want to enjoy the pleasures of this world and this life. But as the believers, if we are to walk the path of the prophets, to walk the path of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, we have to be those folks who are firm upon justice, and to be righteous, and to call everyone, to stand for haqq, and to stand for truth. One example of this, and this is one of the beautiful stories from among our ulama, Sayyid Hassan Mudarris, one of our great ulama. In fact, he was martyred just around the 20th century, around 1937. He was one of the scholars who was a part of the Iranian Constitution Revolution, someone that Imam Khomeini was inspired by his activism, inspired by how he came and he was speaking to authorities to reform governance, to try to make it more just. Sayyid Hassan Mudarris, he was one of those scholars, he was one of those persons who fought against the British occupation of Iran and their influence on Iran. He also opposed the first Shah, Reza Khan. This is the father of the Shah that Imam Khomeini, he had opposed and he stood against. So Sayyid Hassan Mudarris, he was also given this title, and by everyone, that he was brave and incorruptible. Because his vision and the model of his advice was based on that model of the prophets, that model of Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Brave because he was not silent in face of corruption. That's why he was martyred. And he was uncorruptible. He was someone who was just and wanted to establish justice, wanted to see justice prevail. In one of the stories about his life, because although he was active in bringing about reform, stated that he lived in poverty. He was not very wealthy. And once one very wealthy land owner came to Sayyid Hassan Mudarris and said that, look, I want to gift you some land so that he's living in a better place than he was living in. And Sayyid Mudarris, he said, well, he says, do you have family members who are poor? And this landowner said, well, yes, I do. So Sayyid Mudarris, he says, look, you go and you give that land to them. Don't give it to me. That they have more of a right over that land than I do. So we see scholars like Sayyid Hassan Mudarris, who are unswerving in their sense of justice, sense of establishing what is right, that this is what true leadership is. And when someone lives by that way, then they're able to advise people in authority, people in power, because they're living by that word. Sayyid Hassan Mudarris himself displaying the qualities of good leadership, true leadership. That leadership which Imam Sajjad alayhi salatu wasalam, he outlines in the second dua of Sayfat Sajjadiyah. And this is despite that whether the people they accept or not, he's living up to his responsibility. That this is my responsibility, that I must advise, I must be an example of leadership, even if the people reject. Just as we rejected many of the advice of the prophets, he rejected the advice of the Imams, and one of the things that, again, is very much connected to the time which we live in, and how the people, they rejected the call of the Prophet Lut. And what was their response to Prophet Lut? They said, فَمَا كَانَ جَوَابَ قَوْمِهِ إِلَّا أَنْ قَالُوا أَخْرِجُوا آلَ لُوطٍ مِنْ قَرْيَتِكُمْ إِنَّهُمْ أُنَاسٌ يَتَطَهَّرُونَ. This is, take Lut out of our town. That he should leave. Him and anyone who follows him. Why? Because they're Puritans. They are people who want to be pure, people who want to abide by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. So yes, it is true that if you are advising, if you're trying to give advice based on the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, live your life based on the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will be opposed. You will be opposed. But what's important, as we learn from the Sirat of the Prophet, and the Sirat of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam, that advice should be in the best of manners. As Hazrat Qabanchi, he points out in that version of the Risalat al-Hukuk, and tukhallis nasihatakum, that your advice should be sincere. Your advice should be in the right way. It should be in the correct way. And we don't see, again, the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they disagreed with something, they were not cursing the people or condemning them. He says, no, this is the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the way. That people are disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People are, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لِرَبِّهِ لَكَنُودٌ وَإِنَّهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ لَشَهِيدٌ. Yes, they are ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But yet, their advice and the manner in which they gave their advice was something that was suitable for the time. Not in a disrespectful way, but with ikhlas. With ikhlas. And that's why we see that the leadership of the Prophet and anyone who plans to walk in the footsteps of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam, as Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he points out in the second dua of Sayfat Sajjadiyah, where he says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin aminika ala wahyik. So Allah, give your salutations and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad, who is the guardian of your wahy, of your revelation. So if we are to give that advice, that nasiha, then we have to be the guardians of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's revelation. And not only understand what it says and what it means, what is correct and what is not correct, but even the methodology that is used. What was the methodology in which the prophets they used when they were calling their people towards righteousness? When they were advising their people? That nushat al-Nuh, that advice of Noah. How was that advice of Noah? Of course, when we read the history of the Prophet Noah, every day he would go to the market and people would throw stones at the Prophet, to the point that the stones would come up to his neck and one of his sons would come and dig him out, or a couple of his sons would come and dig him out of that rocks, mudar rocks on him. And every day he would go. But in which situation did the Prophet Noah, that he cursed and condemned his people and just brushed them off? No, he gave them advice in the best of manners. Musa, when he went to Fir'aun, he didn't tell him, oh, well, get away from this authority, you have no right. No, his first advice to Fir'aun was, hey, purify yourself. هل لك أن تزكى وأهديك إلى ربك فتخشى. To submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if that occurs, then the situation, whatever oppressive situation, that would subside. And that is what we see in true leadership, that leadership of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, that they are the guardians of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wahy. وَنَجِيبُكَ مِنْ خَلَقِكَ. Again, going back to the dua of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, Allah gives salutations upon Muhammad, who is your guardian of your wahy. وَنَجِيبُكَ مِنْ خَلَقِكَ. And he's the most choice of people among your creation. وَسَفِيُّكَ مِنْ عِبَادِكَ. Why is he the most choice person among your creation? Why? Because he is the most purest of your servants. That in his ibadah and his worship of you, Allah, that he is the most purest person. Imam al-Rahmah, he is a guide of Rahmah. He's the Imam of Rahmah. The Prophet, he's been sent rahmatan lil alameen. That even when people oppose him, he was still that symbol of Rahmah for the entire universe. And in fact, also Imam Ali alayhi wasallam, when we read his letter to Malik Ashtar, and he tells Malik Ashtar, and we just kind of indicated this the other night, that Imam Ali gives Malik Ashtar the formula for establishing justice. And before Imam Ali even starts to speak about justice itself, adl, wal qist, he tells Malik Ashtar to be or have rahmah for those citizens. Have rahmah for the people who are under your authority. And so therefore, if there is rahmah in the heart of those people who are in positions of power and authority, if they have rahmah, if rahmah can be instilled in their hearts, then justice will prevail. But without rahmah, then there will not be any justice. Without rahmah, there will be no justice. وَقَائِدُ الْخَيْرِ. So these are the qualities of the Prophet, as Imam Zayn al-Abidin is pointing out. وَقَائِدُ الْخَيْرِ. And he is a leader towards good, towards righteousness. وَمِفْتَاحُ الْبَرَكَةِ. And he is the key to barakah, to blessings, to the blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the type of leadership that all of our A'imma alayhim afsat wasalam, they carry with themselves. Even if they were not leaders in the political realm, they had these qualities of leadership. And if each and every one of us, as the Prophet says, kullukum ra, each of you are leaders, each of you are shepherds, وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. And each and every one of you are responsible or will be asked about your sheep. Will be asked about your flock. Will be asked about those people in which you're engaging with, because that is also part of the dynamics of power. That yes, from one aspect you may be the subject or a citizen, but from another aspect you have a responsibility of leadership. Especially if you have the example before you of the Quran, the example before you of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. That though they were not political leaders in some instances, nonetheless their leadership is shown through their advice. Just like the prophets, they may have not been leaders or political leaders or willed political authority, but yet they were leaders in calling people towards goodness and towards righteousness. And this is the purpose for which Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, he stood up against the corruption of Bani Umayyah. He stood up against Yazid, and thus he was martyred on the plains of Karbala, along with his companions, along with his family members. And thereafter Imam Zayn al-Abidin, the women and children, they were imprisoned and ushered from Karbala to Kufa, to Sham, to Damascus. Sham, which was one of the most difficult places, as Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he stated that on this journey, the most difficult place was Asham. But as the Ahlul Bayt, they went back to Karbala to pay respects to the Shuhada, to bring the heads of the Shuhada back to Karbala. That was also a difficult moment for the Ahlul Bayt. According to some of the accounts, that they stayed there for 3 days. And in some narrations it says that because the event or reliving that event was so painful for people, to go back to Karbala on the 40th. So according to some accounts as well, it says that Rubab, that she also decided to remain behind after the caravan they were leaving after 3 days. The caravan had decided to return back to Medina. But this was also a painful moment. They say that as the caravan came closer to Medina, they came close to Medina. At one point, Kulthum, she stopped and she was looking at Medina, wondering that how to enter the city of Medina, the city of Rasulullah. So she began to say, مدينة جدنا لا تقبلينا فبالحسرات والأحزان جئنا. O Medina of our grandfather, O Medina of Rasulullah, لا تقبلينا, how do you accept us back? فبالحسرات والأحزان جئنا. We only come with sad news back to Medina. We only come with broken hearts back to Medina. ألا فأخبر رسول الله عنا بأننا قد فجعنا في أبينا. That tell our grandfather, tell Rasulullah that what has happened to us, what calamity have we faced. خرجنا من قبل أهلنا جمعا رجعنا لا رجال ولا بنين بنينا O Medina, when we left from you, we left with our entire family. We left all together. But now we return to Medina with no men, folks. The men have been killed. They have been martyred. And we do not return with our children. ألا يا جدنا قتلوا حسينا ولم يرعوا جناب الله فينا. O Rasulullah, that they have killed and martyred Hussein. So we come back to Medina without Hussein. We left with Hussein, but we come back without Hussein. No one observed the rights of the Ahlul Bayt. No one observed this right. لَقَدْ حَتَكُوا النِّسَاء وَحَمَّلُوهَا عَلَى الْأَقْتَابِ قَهْرًا أَجْمَعِينَ. They imprisoned your women, folks. They imprisoned them and ushered them around the Muslim world. They did not observe the rights of Ali Muhammad. على لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا وأي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم بحق هذا المجلس الحسيني اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حوائجنا واشفي مرضانا ورحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لواء بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. فاطمة حسين.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت فبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. سفر کردم به دنبال سرتون سپر بودم برای دخترتون سفر کردم برای سر تو سپر بودم برای دختر تو سپر بودم برای دختر تو از آن ساعت که باشد شور و شین. زینب آمد بر سر قبر حسین. حسین با زبان آل اندور از وطن، گفت با قبر برادر این سخن. السلام ای کشته دور از وطن. السلام ای شای بی غسل و کفن. بهر تو امروز مهمان آمدن، خواهرت از شام و ایران آمدن، خواهرت از شام و ایران آمده. خیز از جای برادر بهر تو سوغات آوردم. خیز از جای برادر بهر تو سوغات آوردم. خبر مرگ دختر 3 سالم از شام ویران آوردم. باز فتادیم به سودای تو یا حسین، باز فتادیم به سودای تو یا حسین. گشتیم دیوانه و شیدای تو یا حسین، گشتیم دیوانه و شیدای تو یا حسین. یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین، یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین، یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین، یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین. ای به نسب جان رسول خدا یا حسین، ای به نسب جان رسول خدا یا حسین. وارث علم لدن، وارث علم لدن، شافی روز جزا یا حسین. یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین، یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین، یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین. ای به نسب جان رسول خدا یا حسین، ای به نسب جان رسول خدا یا حسین. وارث علم لدن، وارث علم لدن، شافی روز جزا یا حسین. یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین، یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین، یاد ز مظلومیت کرده و گریان کنیم یا حسین. یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین اگه کشتن چرا حابت ندادن حسین خبر بر مادر و بابت ندادن حسین خبر بر مادر و بابت ندادن حسین خودم دیدم سرت را میبریدن حسین خودم دیدم تنت را میکشیدن حسین تو گل باغ نبی اکرمی تو به خیل عاشقان کن نظر یا ابی عبدالله یا ابی عبدالله یا ابی عبدالله هی یوسف زهرا یا ابی عبدالله هی یوسف زهرا یوسف زهرا ای خور سر قوم بر سر نیزه صوت قرآن تو بر سر نیزه صوت قرآن تو به سما میرسند به گوش ما میرسند ای که از روی نی ای که از روی نی صوت قرآن تو به سما میرسند به گوش ما میرسد اگه کشتن چرا حابت ندادن حسین خبر بر مادر و بابت ندادن حسین خودم دیدم تنت را میکشیدن حسین خودم دیدم سرت را میبریدن حسین تو گل باغ نبی اکرمی تو به خیل عاشقان کن نگهی تو گل باغ نبی اکرمی تو به خیل عاشقان کن نگهی یا ابی عبدالله یا ابی عبدالله هی یوسف زهرا یا ابی عبدالله هی یوسف زهرا یا ابی عبدالله ببی أنت وأمي يا مظلوم يا أبا عبد الله الحسين ففوزا فوزا عظيما السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيب الله السلام عليك يا أبا القاسم يا محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين وابن السيد الوسيين السلام عليك يا علي بن أبي طالب السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت رسول الله يا قرة عين الرسول السلام عليك ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا سبتي نبي الرحمة والهمام الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء يا سلطان يا أبا الحسن. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. الأمان 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 من فتن الزمان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وزهورك وعجل اللهم فرجهم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بالنبي وآله رحم الله من يقرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الإخلاص والسلامات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم افتح لنا بالخير واختم لنا بالخير واجعل عواقبنا وعواقب أمور المسلمين الحاضرين الغائبين الباني خيرا. بر خاتم انبیا محمد مصطفی بلند صلوات. اللهم صل